Hey girl, yes, you. You are seen, you are loved, and you were made for more. Created especially for teen girls, chart-topping Christian artist Ann Wilson invites you to her 40-day devotional, Hey Girl, through honest stories, scripture, and journal prompts. Ann talks about real struggles, comparison, insecurity, doubt, and faith, reminding you that God is always near and fighting for you. Hey Girl, from K-Love Books. Get your copy today at klove.com/books.
Each week on Culinary Confidential, Christina Cates, a seasoned foodie who has worked at some of New York City's top restaurants, will share her passion for the culinary world. Whether you're a professional chef, a restaurant enthusiast, or a lover of good food, Christina dives into the heart of hospitality, exploring the trends, triumphs, and challenges facing the food service profession. And you won't want to miss her chats with some of the most interesting and influential industry voices. And now, please take your seat at the table as Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates starts now, exclusively on AM 970, The Answer.
Welcome to Culinary Confidential, the show where I pull back the curtain on the people, places, and passions shaping the way we eat today. I'm your host, Christina Cates, and tonight's episode is one I've been looking forward to because we're diving into the stories behind some of the most exciting dining scenes in America, guided by someone who has spent years chronicling the real heartbeat of food culture. But before we get started, the show is produced in association with my dear friend, Lucas A. Ferrara. Now, if you've ever flipped through Food and Wine, Robb Report, or Los Angeles Magazine, or if you're the type who plans vacations around what you're going to eat, tonight's guest is a name you definitely know. Andy Wang is one of the most respected food and lifestyle journalists working today. He has this remarkable ability to not just report on restaurants, but to explain them, to connect the dots between chefs, neighborhoods, cultures, and the deeper forces that shape where we love to dine. Andy has covered everything from luxury dining trends to hidden strip mall gems. He has followed chefs before they were household names, spotlighted the restaurants that define entire cities, and never shies away from telling the story behind a dish or a restaurant's rise. His writing captures that magical intersection where culture, business, food, and personality all collide, and somehow he makes it all feel effortless. But what I love most about Andy's work, and why I'm thrilled he's joining us tonight, is that he understands food as a human story. He has sat with some of the most influential chefs and restaurateurs of our time. But he also champions the people who don't always get the credit they deserve. The immigrants, the families, the line cooks, the neighborhood visionaries. His stories make you feel like you're pulling up a chair in the kitchen with him. Tonight, we're going to talk about his journey, how he became one of the most trusted voices in food journalism, the trends he sees shaping our dining future, the chefs and restaurants people should have on their radar. And because this is Culinary Confidential, we're absolutely going to dig into the behind-the-scenes drama, surprises, and joy that come with covering the food world at the highest level. We'll also explore how cities like Los Angeles, New York, and Las Vegas have evolved in their dining identities, and why some of the most exciting food in America is happening in unexpected pockets. So, whether you're a chef, a home cook, a restaurant lover, or just someone who appreciates a good story, this episode is packed with insights, inspiration, and maybe a few secrets that only Andy can share. Grab a snack, settle in, and get ready for a deep dive into what makes the modern dining world tick. Andy, welcome to the show. What an honor it is to have you join the show tonight. I absolutely have to thank our common friends for this connection, Jay Seals and Dominic DeBartolomeo of the Cheese Store of Beverly Hills, for bringing us together. I really enjoyed doing the show with them and waited months to muster up the courage to ask Jay to have you come on tonight. Also, when I did the show with the Cheese Guys, I did forget to mention my favorite Jersey boy, who was also family, Chris Reed, because he brought me Jay and Dom, and now Jay and Dom brought me you. So everything has come full circle. So Chris Reed, I appreciate you. I love you. And when you're back on the East Coast, I have a Taylor ham, egg, and cheese with your name on it. I think, Andy, let's start by talking about your podcast, Industry Only at the Cheese Store, that you do with Dom, because first of all, I love that. I listen to it all the time. And you've had some pretty big names on this podcast. Now, how do you know Dom?
So, I mean, the story's pretty funny because I think Dom really did trick me into doing the podcast. As you know, I write about restaurants, food, for all sorts of publications. And my first encounter with Dom was just when I was checking out the new location of the Cheese Store. and thinking about maybe writing a piece. So Dom, takes me to the basement, to, what Ari at Spago calls the dungeon. And we're talking, and he just goes, and keep in mind, we've known each other for about 35 minutes at this point, right? And we know a million people in common. But he goes, what would be fun? We should do a podcast together. And I'm like, okay, cool, Dom. And I'm thinking that he thinks that I have a podcast, or maybe he's thinking about starting one. And we're thinking about doing – when people usually ask you this, it's like, oh, would you like to come on our podcast, or would you like to do one podcast? Then a few months later, our friend Shu Chowdhury, very well known in the New York restaurant world, as a customer, as an investor, as an advisor at lots of places, comes to Beverly Hills and just wants to eat a sandwich. And I go with him, and Dom pretty much tells Shu, oh, Andy and I are going to do a podcast. And Shu goes, okay, that's a great idea. You should do that. Flash forward a couple months later, somehow Dom convinces me to do like an entire season of podcasts. Like, I did not know I was going to be the co-host. I did not know like what we were going to call this thing. I had a bunch of different names that I liked, like the Cheese Store Club. But then as a brainstorming thing, I'm like, well, let's start with who we are. We're industry only, which is my company that throws parties. And we're the cheese store, and Dom and the producer. And again, like, you got a producer. I don't even know how this happened. For like,
he's a mover and a shaker.
Or that's the podcast. So, I mean, I'm glad that I'm this easy to sort of bamboozle and convince to do something. I mean, maybe that's not the best thing for like all the business or personal relationships I've had in my life, but like this worked out in this case.
It does work out. And Dom is such a great guy. He's so easy to talk to. That's why I even enjoyed having him on this show. He has a very convivial spirit, and you feel that even on the pod. And you guys complement each other very well because you're very different. You guys have this yin and a yang thing going, and it's nice for the listener to hear two sides of a story from a different perspective. So have you had a favorite episode that you've done on Industry Only at the Cheese Store?
I mean, there's a few that I've liked a lot, but one thing that I've said over and over again, like the one with Ari at Spago, to mention him again, like, look, Ari and I are not super close. He knows Dom better than he knows me. So I like that one because I was getting to know Ari a little bit better. A lot of the other ones were my friends who I've known a long time, but his story, like, it was two amazing stories at once, right? It was about how restaurants used to be different, meaning that like when he was a teenager, he just convinced Wolfgang Puck to just let him be in his kitchen and start doing things. That kind of thing very rarely happens now for all sorts of reasons. But then it's a story about just growing up and, finding yourself, and just like becoming an adult, like with these people who you work with, who become your family, and how much you're in the weeds and how rewarding it is, but also like how unglamorous it is in a way, and like how as a chef in a lot of ways, or, as an operator, you are publicly social. You're trying to create this festive gathering place, but then you may not be that type of person, like after hours or just alone with your friends, or maybe you really literally just want to be alone by yourself. So I think that one,
yeah,
I liked a lot just because it sort of showed like all the different facets of what it means to, have a career, starting off literally as like some teenager who knew nothing, to ascending to essentially running like one of the most important restaurant empires in the history of America.
That's right. All right. So you've said before that the cheese store, has energy. What's a moment where that energy completely shifted the direction of an episode?
I mean, there was an episode that we did with Michael Lotaggio where we're literally talking about his relationships with Ben Hundreds, who, designed streetwear. Has a brand called The Hundreds, has now opened a restaurant. And because of the way that the cheese store works, all the time there'd be people walking in and out like other prominent chefs. But the thing that was wild about this is we were talking about Ben and his partner Kate, and then 30 minutes later they were upstairs at the cheese store doing a tasting, and they walked downstairs and they heard that Lotaggio's was there, and they interrupt the whole flow of what's going on. But it's such an organic moment because that's really a reminder of the fact that Dom is just doing this during normal work hours, right?
Is that what's going on?
Yeah, and all this stuff is happening around. Literally, we film the podcast sometimes, like between 11 a.m. and 1:30 p.m., which is the busy period at the cheese store. And everybody's like, where's Dom? And every once in a while he has to get up. So that sort of like sums up the everyday chaos. But it was just, it was very apt that somebody you talked about, like, not even magically, he was supposed to be at the cheese store, but I didn't know this, like, just appeared,
Yeah. All right. So so many people in the industry. When you're booking guests for the show, do you just have like a laundry list of people you can have on, or like how are you figuring out who you want to feature?
I mean, Dom and I just talk about like who our friends are, who we want to talk to, who's got newsworthy things. But I would say that the majority of them, yeah, sure. In some cases, just with everything, people have managers and handlers and publicists and all that. But I would honestly say probably 80% of the podcasts were either me or Dom just texting somebody that we already knew and say, will you come on? And then they said yes. And in some cases, their people didn't even know they were doing it.
That's awesome. You have this very grounded, almost empathetic way of asking questions that gets people to reveal the heart behind their work. Where does that interviewing style come from? Were you always that curious about people's backstories?
I've been a journalist for 20 plus years, and I think it's a skill that, on one level is taught. But yeah, you just have to have an empathy. But I also make this joke, right? Because, like a lot of journalists I know are, the purest, most extreme forms of like narcissists, right? Outside of when they're telling stories, they kind of are just like they're in their own little world, and I get that, right? Maybe I'm 20% different from that, but it's sort of this thing where I've always thought, right? And this is back like when I worked at the New York Post, and yes, we would write things that were takedowns and things that were mean. But when you actually had the opportunity to write a profile about somebody that you thought was worthy or special or deserving of the attention, the thing that I always wanted to say, it's like, look, we're going to put in some things in the story that they may not like. We're going to write some things that maybe aren't the most flattering, or maybe aren't the things that they want their parents, or their loved ones or their significant other to know about them. But when we're done, I want this to be an illuminating portrait feature that this person can proudly hang up in their office or send to people, with the understanding that, like, look, this is how the world sees me, and I should still be proud of this. But also, this was my opportunity to tell the world who I am, where I came from, why all that matters, right? Also, it ties back to the fact that, like, podcasts are more interesting when you have somebody else who are not the hosts filling the time, right? The hosts like have this banter that people, can come back for again and again, but you can't build too many solo episodes just around that. Sure, you can build a few, right? But you want there to be other stories. You want people to learn new things, because honestly, like Dom and I could do the same over and over again. Maybe amusing for 6 or 7 people, or maybe Dom has more, so maybe 30 people on his end. But when you bring in a new story, and I'm learning things while the listeners are also learning things, they can tell that I'm excited, Dom's excited. Somebody's like, oh, this question was never asked to me in this way, or you asked in a way that makes me really want to answer it. I think that's just better content.
Absolutely. So how did you decide to get into food journalism, though? You've been doing it for so long, but this is a very specific market to talk about. Were you always curious about food growing up as a child?
I always liked food. I would not say that I was that much of a food enthusiast. I just knew what I liked and didn't like. I guess I didn't realize that I was sort of picky about food until I moved to New York City, and I lived in the West Village, and I just walked around. And this is back before people were using Yelp, way before Instagram. I wasn't really reading food reviews, and I would just go to whatever restaurants were nearby, right? And I remember that on the third month, it took 3 months. I was out with some friends. We're at some French bistro. I don't even remember what it was. And I'm eating moule frite, and I'm eating beef bourguignon. And one of my friends at the time says to the rest of the table, wow, I think this is the first time we've been out with Andy where he's actually enjoyed a meal. Because we were just going to random places. I didn't even really consider that I was being picky. So, it's not that I took that so much to heart. But what I started to realize as I became more of a New Yorker and I started paying more attention and going to the quote unquote right places, is that the best restaurants serve great food, and obviously they also make people feel more alive, right? People go there, for the vibe, for the energy, for the escape.
Yeah.
That's very compelling to me, right? The things that people sort of chase to make them feel more alive. So I got very lucky at the New York Post. I launched a real estate section. I wrote a lot about travel. I became the travel editor. And as you traveled, you pretty much figured out that in most cities around the world, one big reason, and in some cases the primary reason people visited or the thing they cared about most was the restaurants and the nightlife in that city, right? It's literally the cultural currency, right? I'm on multiple group chats now that are about people traveling, and nobody is asking, for the most part, like, what museums am I going to, which of the landmarks do I need to see? It's always just like, hey, I'm going to be in Mexico City. What are the 5 restaurants I need to eat at right now? The rest of the stuff is pretty much like understood, right? You go to Paris, you go to this museum. If you want to do this type of shopping in 70 different cities, you know where you can go find the Chanel and the Dior, right? But what you don't know, unless you've really been there or you're really doing research, is like, where do I get the best taco? Where do I get the best dim sum? Where do I get the best Korean soup, right? Where do I get the place that feels like a nightclub that still has good food but isn't really a nightclub? And then on those nights where I want to go out, where do I actually go to the best nightclub, right? So it's all of that. So much of travel is built around that. And then when I moved to LA, all the editors that had worked for in New York had started hearing or being part of the coverage about how Los Angeles is the most exciting food city in America. And so I just got to write lots of stories about that for places like Food and Wine. And then I became the online food editor for Los Angeles Magazine and wrote, the top 10 restaurants cover story for them. And then it just kind of spiraled.
Just to touch on something you just said, I had Chef Michael LaMonaco on, and he said on the show that restaurants are the main event now for people's evening plans, right? It used to be you would go to a restaurant for a meal and then you would go to do what you were really going to do, go to a show, a theater, whatever. Now the dinner is what people are gathering for. They don't really have the plans afterwards. It's like, where are we going to dinner? And like you said, like that is what's happening all over the world. So the food scene is great.
It's absolutely the main event, right?
Before we go to the break, Andy, tell me about what you're doing with Industry Only, with the parties you're throwing. And I want to come. Jeez.
Yeah,
sounds fun.
Industry Only does 2 types of parties primarily. We throw potlucks that are chef only, operator only, where it's essentially, on the days off for people where, dozens, in some case, hundreds of chefs just gather together, as a way to celebrate, decompress, vent, cook for each other,
like that,
away from their work. So there's that type of party. And then we now get asked by a lot of places, including Wynn Las Vegas, during 50 Best Week, just to curate events, help curate events that are open to the public, just big food festivals. And then we'll throw our little private parties on top of that too.
Small collab with the Wynn. Jeez Louise, Andy. What are you doing these on like Sunday, Monday nights for industry people?
Yeah, for the industry people ones, they're usually Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We've done them primarily in Los Angeles where I live, but we've also done obviously like Vegas, San Diego, Orange County, New York. We get asked to go all sorts of places. We're going to go to Miami soon. We've gotten some really wild offers to do some things in Europe and Asia.
Wow.
And we're just sort of going to look at the schedule and see. Because food is the main event now, we were very lucky last year. We did a food festival during Formula One weekend at Resorts World. And the thing that you have to realize now, whether it's Formula One weekend or it's Art Basel or it's Cannes, there is always some chef, like pop-up, some big restaurant event that is something that everybody wants to get into.
Yeah.
During those weeks. So it's really wild, like how much food drives the culture, right? Like you go to F1 in Miami and some people are like, I'm excited to go see the race and I really want to see Verstappen win again, or if I love Lewis Hamilton or whatever. And there's people who are there for the whole 4 days and are just like, no, I'm going to the Massimo Bottura dinner and the Alinea is doing their pop-up and Carbone Beach is here.
Yeah.
They're literally there because of these other things, and they know the race is happening, but they could not tell you the difference between what a McLaren versus Mercedes is.
That would be me. I'd be like, what are we having for dinner? All right, Andy, let's go to commercial break. Stay tuned. You're listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970 The Answer.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 1250 Broadway in New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate, on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970. The Answer.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential. I'm your host, Christina Cates, and if you're just joining us, you've tuned in at the perfect moment. We're here with the brilliant and ever-curious Andy Wang, one of the most influential food journalists in the country and a man who has spent years uncovering the stories behind the restaurants we obsess over. We're getting into the nitty-gritty here and need to talk about the food scene in America. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
All right, let's talk evolving food culture across the U.S. Should we start in L.A. because that's where you're based now and a city that you love so much?
I mean, we absolutely can start in L.A. You know, I'm going to qualify this by saying that L.A., after the pandemic and the multiple Hollywood strikes and, you know, the fires, like it's been very, very hard for restaurants. At the same time, you know, this is a resilient city and you go to L.A. not to quote unquote eat LA food, or more to the point, LA food like has this vast definition.
Well, LA cuisine, I've heard that. I don't even know what that means.
I mean, a lot of people say these things and they mean it, you know, like, well, let's use the term Angelino cuisine, right? A lot of times that's been like vegetable driven and it's, you know, tied to places like Jelena. Obviously, before that, there's California cuisine and Alice Waters and all that. But Angelino cuisine, for me, is just about how things blend and also how people from other places are just recreating like the best food that they grew up eating, meaning that our Koreatown, you know, has the best Korean food outside of Korea and arguably in some cases possibly better than Korea. And this isn't me saying this. This is Korean operators who have places, you know, in both Seoul and Los Angeles talking about this, right? Our regional Mexican food, our regional Chinese food in the San Gabriel Valley, that stuff is just so vast. And then you have chefs, you know, like Ori and Genevieve at Bestia, Bavel, and Safi's that are, you know, riffing on Israeli heritage and Middle Eastern flavors while, you know, using California ingredients. So LA is just like, or, you know, like what Brian Dunsmore is doing, where essentially he's just cooking classic, or not even classic, but like long lost, hard to find esoteric American food, you know, that he's finding in cookbooks that are more a century old and turning that into one of the hottest restaurants in Los Angeles. Or Pisa Palace, which is an Italian, American, Indian sports bar. I mean, that's literally just what it is. So the things that are happening, I think, it's not to say that it's like so different or unique, like any one of these restaurants for America. But I think the combination of having all of that in one city is the thing that makes LA really striking.
You know, I just haven't been to LA in so long. I haven't been there in over 10 years, to be honest with you. I feel like I have no idea what's going on in the food scene there. So I really should come out and see you and see my cheese store guys. Okay, are there any emerging LA chefs or concepts you're most excited about right now? Even if they're not like on the radar for most people.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite restaurant in LA right now that honestly, like, you know, maybe seats 20 people at once is called Roast Duck by Paul Ward. It is the opposite of an emerging chef. It's literally a chef who had retired in Thailand that a restaurateur in LA found and somehow convinced him to come out of retirement and just, you know, cook his perfect duck one way. And it's not like, you know, and it's not like Peking duck. It's not like some crispy duck that you've had before. But it's just comfort food, you know, without pretense, you know, and with, lots of flavor because it's, Thai food, and they're using it in curries, and, they're making the spicy basil stir fry with it. So that restaurant is very interesting to me. And then I would say that also not emerging, but there are restaurants that start in LA that make an impact all over. And I would say that, like Wovo, the only pasta restaurant in America that actually flies its pasta in from Italy, like they're doing really well in LA, and they're going to open in New York and Nomad next year.
Oh, I'm going to look out for that. That's great. All right, speaking of New York, let's come to the East Coast for a minute. I think you and I talked before the show about this, the death of the nightclub scene in New York. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think people are just looking for something different. And also, look, the younger generation, for all sorts of reasons, I think people are correct. And this isn't just about a clean lifestyle. And this certainly isn't just about Ozempic, right? They're drinking less, they're partying less, they're hooking up less, they're going to sleep earlier. All that seems to be true based on what operators are just telling me just about restaurant behavior. Forget nightclub behavior, right? And a lot of the scene in New York, obviously, it's shifted to private clubs. Even somebody like George has Chez Margot. So the places where people are just popping off late at night and buying bottles, I think a lot of people have outgrown that, or the new generation just isn't really looking for that. And the people who used to dominate that type of world, meaning for example, Eugene Ram at 10 June, he now runs extremely hard to get into restaurants. I mean, some of the hardest ones in America where, you probably saw Taylor Swift and Sabrina Carpenter just went to the corner store and he opened another restaurant, the 86, which is even smaller and harder to get into. And like you're saying with Michael and Monaco, you go to a place like the corner store or the 86, or you go to obviously a place like Teresi, or you go to the number one ranked restaurant in New York, Sema, which is one of the great Indian restaurants from Unapologetic Foods. That is the main event.
Yep.
You don't make plans after that, right? So I feel like everything just kind of adjusts, right? Restaurants are nightlife. And yeah, you can certainly go to Bushwick and find the, new place where the indie DJ's playing. But remember, all that indie rock stuff has adjusted too, right? James Murphy from LCD Sound System opened a wine bar, and the Four Horsemen is now in the 50 best restaurants in North America list.
Yeah.
There was a time I remember in Brooklyn, because I'm old, where we were in Park Slope, on the edge of Gowanus, in some huge venue that was not really designed to be a music venue, and James Murphy is just DJing, and the Raptors about to play, and that was such important nightlife. But James Murphy also just wanted to go eat at Marlowe and Sons, right? So it's just that sort of thing is the thing that endures. People don't party like that their entire lives, but a lot of people want to eat at good, fun restaurants their entire adult lives, right?
Yeah. I mean, it does make me kind of sad, though, because I have just the greatest memories, in my 20s, in the New York City nightlife scene. Even the closing of Artichoke Pizza on 10th Avenue a few months ago was a knife in the heart, because that was the place you would go to between Avenue and One Oak at 3 o'clock in the morning for a slice.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, and it had ties to the Tao guys. And it's funny that you mentioned Avenue and One Oak, because obviously we're talking about private clubs. Scott Sardiano's about to open Zero Bond in Las Vegas. So a lot of these things have also moved, to places like Vegas. It's meaning that the Tao guys are still building a huge day club in Vegas, right?
Yeah.
But Vegas is sort of the place where it still is the 24-hour city in a lot of ways, right? It still is a place where people go all over because they want to pop off in a certain way. But realize Scott is doing Zero Bond because years ago he got over the idea of places like One Oak.
I mean, the private club scene in New York, though, it's very saturated. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of private members clubs, to be honest with you. I did just join one, now, I'm going this week because it's opening. But for me, it's I don't want to sit in a room with the same 200 people, I want to be around different kinds of people, different cultures, different, statuses. And New York is just very much, it's becoming boring, honestly, and it's uninspiring. And I think you see that not so much in other cities, but, maybe the change with this new mayor that we're getting it's going to change the whole dining scene as a whole. But everyone's sticking to their own little pocket of people in these private clubs. And I think that sucks. Yeah,
I mean, I think another part of it, too, is that, I mean, this happened with LA too, right? It's just sort of, there's a wealth disparity, right? And there are people that can go out a certain way and want to go out a certain way. And then there's people now who've just decided that they're not really going out at all, or they're realizing that like it is not that viable to be a quote unquote creative, in these cities, and they're just going somewhere else.
Right. Let's go to our last commercial break. When we do get back, though, Andy, I want to talk a little bit more about Vegas and maybe Miami, too, and Chicago. We didn't talk about Chicago. That's a great dining scene right now. But stay tuned. You're listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970 The Answer.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 1250 Broadway in New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970, The Answer.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential. I'm Christina Cates, and if you're just joining us, well, shame on you. Just kidding. I'm still here with the man, the myth, the legend, Andy Wang, one of the most influential food journalists in the country. And we've been talking about the evolving dining scene across the country. We just talked to New York, talked to LA. Andy, welcome back to the show. Let's jump back to Vegas, shall we? We were talking about, I think Scott Sartiano, you mentioned, is opening Zero Bond in Vegas. But Vegas right now is in a tourism slump. That's not new news. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, look, for years and years, and it's finally caught up with Vegas. With the resorts fees, with the bottled water that was more than $10, just with the cocktails that were $35, right? With bottle minimums, with show tickets getting more and more expensive. People just felt like they were being gouged.
Taken advantage of, yeah.
And then obviously, like, there's all sorts of reasons that, tourism is down and people aren't coming from Canada, and people from certain countries, are a little bit leery about coming to the United States. I mean, I felt this during the World Series of Poker last year, where you suddenly realize that, like, there's all these people from around the world who are very disincentivized to come to America with large amounts of cash that they want to take in and out, and stuff like that. Just the combination of all those things just means that fewer people are coming and, fewer people are spending. But what I would say is that the higher end places, meaning, the casinos like Wynn and Venetian and Bellagio, are the ones that are best equipped to weather the storm because they are more immune, to the overall thing of the, because there's a lot of Vegas now that's like middle market or down market, right? Mm. And, even some, even like the CEO of Wynn, has like said, like on public calls, or that there are parts of Vegas that aren't really built for everyone, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole point of this. So if you look at the things that are coming in, right, that are doing well right now, like Simon Kim opened Cote at the Venetian, the Michelin-starred Korean restaurant. Yep. The only Michelin-starred Korean steakhouse in America. And that's thriving. The Carbone guys just opened Carbone Riviera, which is their most extravagant restaurant that they've ever opened in Las Vegas. It's got like whole king crab and whole turbo. It's got its own mini yacht, like next to the Bellagio fountains. We talked about how Zurban's going to open and Sartiano's is going to open. Gymkhana, a 2 Michelin-starred Indian restaurant from London, is opening its first U.S. outpost at Aria.
I thought they were opening one in New York, too.
They're going to open Ambassador's Clubhouse in New York, but Gymkhana at Aria is going to happen first.
Nice. All right, so
But
you
the
think
point
it'll
is,
be revived?
these are all super high-end things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So people are still reaching for the sky, and you're not really talking about, like, there's no excitement about, like, oh, there's some new $9.95 buffet. I mean, that's not the thing that's going to bring people in at this point.
That's right. Okay, what drives the boom in off-strip dining? Which areas are becoming must-visit food neighborhoods?
I mean, James Trees is absolutely crushing the Arts District. He has a bigger Esther's Kitchen now. He opened Bar Bohème. There's other great places in that neighborhood like Good Pie and Maid Street Provisions. And you heard the word Arts District, so it is, in some ways like what happened in the LA Arts District, or or like what's been happening in New York's Dumbo, right?
Or Miami's Wynwood.
Yeah, Miami's Wynwood, exactly, which is also popping off in its own way. So the Arts District, there's a very vibrant Chinatown in Vegas that isn't just Chinese food. It's all sorts of Asian food, Korean, Vietnamese, Japanese, like Japanese from ramen shops to the highest end omakase, but also just cool neighborhood restaurants, like Brian Howard's Sparrow and Wolf, right? And there's a tiki bar, the Golden Tiki, that never closes there. And you can even just go there and eat at like chain things like the Halal Guys, which is just really good when you're drunk. But, there are places there like Raku where all the chefs go to at 2 a.m. that also exists, to cater to a late night audience. And it's open later than the stuff on the Strip is.
Wait, so they're not going to the Spearmint Rhino after work?
Well, the Spearmint Rhino, they can go after or before too, right?
Yeah. All right, let's talk Miami. Miami is a bustling food scene now. There's restaurants opening left and right. It's expanded well beyond South Beach. You're in Wynwood, Coral Gables, Brickell. All these neighborhoods now have fantastic restaurants. What's next for Miami?
I mean, a lot of us are wondering how sustainable this is because the restaurants there are like so big bucks. Like Amazonica opened, and I think it might be, it's over 500 seats, maybe over 600, but that's like where Komodo is. It's not far from Sexy Fish. All these places, you're talking about like dinner blending into nightlife. Amazonica is like Rainforest Cafe if the guys from EDC programmed it, right? These things are so much stimuli. I mean, and before Amazonica existed, in Miami, you could say that Sexy Fish might have been the most over-the-top restaurant, just with like how theatrical it is. And you say this even though the other restaurant that I mentioned, Komodo, is like owned by Dave Grutman, who, was the king of Miami, is the king of Miami nightlife, right? Mm-hmm. But these restaurants, right? There's that restaurant Poppy Steak where, the most extravagant thing isn't bottle service, but it's the beef case, which is the meat that comes in the briefcase, But then you have operators like Fuel Hospitality, right? That, have ghee in Wynwood, and they just opened ghee in Atlanta, where they're just like, this is just our version of Indian food with seasonal local ingredients, and it's a neighborhood restaurant that's also a destination restaurant. Or, even a restaurant like Mimi Chinese from Toronto comes and opens. These things are, sure, they're vibey and all that, but there are a lot of these places that are more about the food than anything else. But it's Miami, so there's also going to be a little bit of a scene, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like Maple and Ash, one of the top steakhouses in America, opened in Miami. Rosa Negra, one of the top steakhouses in Mexico, arguably the top steakhouse in Mexico, opened. So the big things from all the other cities are coming to open here, while, as you know, like the Catches and the Carbones are already here.
That's right. All right, but Chicago right now is in the pinnacle of its like peak dining season, right? This is what New York kind of used to be like a few years ago. I have friends that work in the industry in Chicago. I've had a ton of people from Chicago on the show. There's a huge scene happening there, and there's New Yorkers moving to Chicago to work in restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chicago has the whole mix, right? Like, it's got obviously, like, the super high-end fine dining. Like, Smith was in the top 10 of the North America's 50 Best list. You've got Oriole. Obviously, like, everybody knows about the impact of Alinea. But like New York, Chicago just has, like, its own casual, regional, everyday specialties that are, like, done by mom-and-pop places, but also, then recreated by huge operators, meaning, like Brendan Sodakoff, meaning Let Us Entertain You, right? So it's the city that has the ability to bring in top talent from all over because there's a market for it. But obviously it's like, it's a city where you still want to go eat a good burger or a hot dog. They've got you covered, and some people argue that it's the best one, right?
Yeah. All right. Is there any article that you've, wrote throughout your career that you are especially super proud of?
I mean, there's been a lot of stories that luckily, I've sort of gotten, to break or to be early on. There's a story that David Lanslow and I wrote for the New York Post, probably 15 years ago. I think the headline was just "Los Angeles is the future." And we sort of called out a lot of people who, ended up doing bigger things, we wrote about Brian Ang during the Spice Table, before Casilla, just things like that. And then obviously the thing that you learn is that things go through cycles, because then all this boom stuff happened with LA, and we're sort of through the mini bust now. So I write a lot of stories that seem extremely true and extremely correct at the time. And the thing that I would just say is that everything evolves and changes. And I go back and I look at some of the things, that I've written, declaring how good restaurants were and seeing the awards that they've gotten years later. And sure, I'm proud of a lot of them, but I was at my dinner, with a really, really big restaurant operator recently. And one thing that he said to me that was so smart is that he had a lot of the same formative restaurant experiences that I have, right? And we had a moment where we were both talking about how early Zahav, Mike Solomonov's Israeli restaurant, maybe 15 plus years ago when we went, was our favorite restaurant in America. We believed it was the best restaurant in America. Or that Bartolotta at Wynn was the best seafood restaurant in the history of America. That closed more than 10 years ago, right? But the point that we're really getting to, because we're eating at Safi's, that he was making, he was like, Andy, I guarantee you right now that Safi's is a better restaurant at this moment than Zahav was 15 years ago. And Zahav is probably a better restaurant than it was 15 years ago, because things evolve, people learn things, they get better, right? And you cling to your memories, and you realize that things improve, and we're lucky. Most food has been solved. The best Chinese restaurant from 15 years ago is probably not in the top 10 Chinese restaurants, in America or in the world now. And I think that's sort of the way that I look at some of my stories, Maybe that was the best thing that somebody ever wrote about Paul Bartolotta at the time, but a lot's changed since then. And you just sort of have to recognize that evolves, but you have to recognize how lucky you are, right? Just to get to go eat now, when so many things you're eating are influenced by all the things that came before. And that's why that they are actually objectively better if you think about it.
Oh, I love that. All right, we're running out of time, but I have a couple more questions for you. Is there anyone you haven't met in the industry that you want to sit down and break bread with? Because you know everyone and their mother.
I mean, I've been really, really lucky. And so, no, I don't think that there's anybody it'd be so amazing to sit with them. I was just in Korea, and he doesn't speak, barely any English. But I spent a week where Ferran Adria, thanks to the people at Automix, was sitting at the table with us. And that's very interesting. But that's not any more of a rush than just eating some amazing taco for the first time and finding out that nobody's ever told this person's story, right?
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
I don't want there to be a glib answer, but it's is there somebody from the past? I mean, no, not really. I've just been very lucky that, even just who Dom and I have talked to, these are the people that I'm very privileged to talk to all the time,
I love that answer. Okay, last question. Are there any trends that you're watching that could redefine all food scenes in the next few years?
I mean, you see the rise of just hyper-regional cooking, the Indian food that Unapologetic Foods and some other groups are doing.
Yeah.
The type of Thai food that everybody from Crew in New York to Holy Basil to even Speedboat in London is doing. So I think that, this is the era, right, where you get past the pad thai, you get past the butter chicken, you get past the soup dumpling, you get past the spaghetti with meatballs, and you really dig into this is the obscure grandma version of Italian American food, or the obscure auntie version of Korean food that all these people in this one specific area eat, but now everybody potentially has the opportunity to eat it.
You got it. All right, Andy, thank you so much for your time tonight. This was a fantastic show. I appreciate all of your insight, and I hope to get to LA to meet you one day. Or if you're in New York, give me a call.
All right, we'll eat together, I'm sure.
Yes, have a good one.
Okay, you too.
Okay, that brings us to the ingredient of the week. This week on Culinary Confidential, we're diving into an ingredient that chefs, mixologists, and food insiders love to obsess over, and that's yuzu. Bright, aromatic, and deeply complex, this Japanese citrus brings a flavor that lands somewhere between lemon, mandarin, and grapefruit, yet is unmistakably its own. Yuzu has been cherished in Japan, Korea, and China for over 1,000 years, originally cultivated for its resilience. It can grow in harsher climates where other citrus fails. Historically, it's been used not just for cooking, but in winter wellness rituals like yuzu-yu, a hot bath infused with whole yuzu fruits to promote health and good fortune. Today, its perfumed zest and vibrant juice have become staples in everything from fine dining sauces to modern cocktails. It's the perfect ingredient to feature tonight with renowned food journalist Andy Wang, whose pulse on restaurant culture makes him the ideal guide to what's trending. From yuzu koshu in top omakase spots to pastries, marinades, and bar programs, yuzu is the subtle luxury chefs can't stop talking about. Fresh yuzu can be elusive, but during peak season in the winter, you may spot it in all Japanese markets or specialty Asian grocers. For everyday cooking, most chefs rely on yuzu juice that's bottled at the source, yuzu koshu paste, or dried yuzu peel. All available, again, at the Asian markets or gourmet shops or even online. A little goes a long way, but its impact is unforgettable. Whether it's finishing a crudo, elevating a vinaigrette, or adding citrus magic to a cocktail, yuzu brings the kind of nuance that sparks a great conversation, especially with Andy at the table. But that is the show for tonight. Thank you for listening and have a great night.
The preceding program is sponsored by Shake It Off Live, LLC.
Hey girl, yes, you. You are seen, you are loved, and you were made for more. Created especially for teen girls, chart-topping Christian artist Ann Wilson invites you to her 40-day devotional, Hey Girl, through honest stories, scripture, and journal prompts. Ann talks about real struggles, comparison, insecurity, doubt, and faith, reminding you that God is always near and fighting for you. Hey Girl, from K-Love Books. Get your copy today at klove.com/books.